Let's move on, because Seti, during his debate with Polite, brought out the 42 negative confessions of Ma'at to try to give you the impression that the ancient Egyptians condemned homosexuality.
Hail those whose face is turned backwards, who cometh forth from the dwelling. I have not committed acts of impurity, neither have I lain with men. I have not committed acts of impurity, nor have I lain with men. That's clear. I'm standing on that. This homosexuality shit is killing our ass. It's killing our ass. It's destroying the family.
First of all, there is a lot of critical information that Sara Suten Seti left out when he referenced the 42 negative confessions of Ma'at. For starters, he didn't even tell you at what point in Egyptian history this text was written. So what I'm going to do is go to the preface of my Book of the Dead, translated by E.A. Wallace Budge. And I'm pretty sure that this preface is in every edition of the Book of the Dead. But listen to this. It says, the Papyrus of Ani is the largest, the most perfect, and the best illuminated of all the papyri containing copies of the Theban recension of the Book of the Dead. Its rare vignettes, hymns, and chapters, and its descriptive rubrics render it of unique importance for the study of the Book of the Dead, and it holds a very high place among the funerary papyri that were, listen to this, that was written between 1500 BC and 1350 BC. That means the 42 negative confessions of Ma'at was written sometime between 1500 BC and 1350 BC. And if you know anything about Egyptian dynasty chronology, then you will know that that means that the 42 negative confessions of Ma'at was written sometime in the 18th dynasty. So if you do the math, counting from the pre-dynastic period, which scholars estimate started between 6500 BC to 5000 BC, then that means there was already an Egyptian civilization in existence about 5,000 years before the 42 negative confessions of Ma'at was written. So this can't be something that was universally believed in Egypt anyway, because it didn't exist until the 18th dynasty. So the way Seti was reading it though, when he was debating Polite, he made it sound like there was a universal belief held by Egyptians for all time. Why didn't he tell people there is no testimony of the 42 negative confessions of Ma'at before the 18th dynasty? Why didn't he mention that? But that's not even all. Another thing Seti failed to mention is that Confession 27 does not read the same way in every translation of the Book of the Dead. Seti was only reading one translation of the Book of the Dead. Let me show you how it reads in Budge's translation, which is the translation I have. And I'm going to show you something very important that Seti conveniently left out. This is what it says. Hail Herfhoff, who cometh forth from thy cavern. I have not committed acts of sexual impurity or lain with men. Now on the surface, it seems like that the implied thou shalt not that most people read into this text is thou shalt not lay with men. And a lot of Egyptologists try to run to the 42 negative confessions of Ma'at to condemn homosexuality. But as I said, this is only one translation of this verse. And in fact, this is not even the first way this verse was translated by E.A. Wallace Budge. I'm going to show you an even earlier translation of this verse. And check out how it reads. We're going to read the same exact verse, the same negative confession 27, but we're going to read it from the 1895 edition of the Book of the Dead. Same translator though. Now listen to this. It says, Hail, thou whose face is turned behind thee. I have not lusted. nor have I committed fornication, nor have I done any other abominable thing. Wait a minute. What happened to the part about or lain with men? Why is that not in the earlier version of the Book of the Dead? And why didn't Seti mention that? See, he's only giving you one translation, and he's giving you a modern translation that supports his argument. But that's not all. There are other translators that translate this verse differently as well. We're going to go to a book titled The Literature of Ancient Egypt, an anthology of stories, instructions, and poetry. And we're going to see how the renowned Egyptologist Raymond Oliver Faulkner translated Negative Confession 27 in the Book of the Dead. Now listen to this. O Bastet, who has come forth from the shrine, I have not winked. O he whose face is behind him, who has come forth from the pit, I have not masturbated. I have not copulated with a catamite. And a catamite is a boy kept for homosexual practices. Now, I'm sure y'all will agree that this is a far cry from Budge's translation, which states, I have not lain with men. See, this lets you know that the scholars are in disagreement on how Negative Confession 27 should be translated. And even Budge's 1895 translation of Negative Confession 27 read, I have not fornicated. So for Seti to reference a verse that did not come into existence until nearly 5,000 years after the Egyptians first formed as a nation, as well as use a verse that is surrounded with controversy by even the most advanced and respected Egyptian scholars, shows a form of deception. So why didn't Seti mention this? Why didn't Seti mention that not all Egyptian scholars translate this the same way? He just pulls it out, reads it, and then makes people think that not only were the Egyptians united against homosexuality, but that they've always been that way. But as you can see, nobody really knows how it translates. But if you examine Negative Confession 27 in the original language, along with how the Egyptians view homosexuality overall, then you will see that the meaning of this verse is that it was unacceptable for a man to have sexual relations with another passive feminine-like man. Not have sex with a man in general. See, what they don't tell you, these so-called experts on ancient Kemet, is that the Egyptians' view towards homosexual relations was it was acceptable if you were doing it to dominate or humiliate another male. To just casually do it or to do it with like a willing passive partner, yes, there is literary evidence that the Egyptians were against that. But to say they were against homosexuality in all shapes, forms, and fashions, that's a lie. So what we're going to do is take a look at Negative Confession 27 in the original Kemetic language, and you're going to see what it says. The first word we're going to look at in this verse is the word neck, and it means to have penetrative sex with. This word carries no implications, good or bad. It just means to have penetrative sex with. And scholars usually translate this word as commit adultery with, fornicated with, copulated with, lain with, so on and so forth. However, the next word in this verse we're going to look at is the word nekek. And this is the man on who the sexual act is performed. Or in other words, the passive partner in the penetrative sex act. Today we will call that the receiver, or somebody who has been sodomized. So what this verse actually says, when you give a literal translation, is I have not sexually penetrated a passive man, or a passive man who has been penetrated. This is not condemning homosexuality in general. Look at the terminology that it's using. It's condemning a certain kind of homosexuality, which is passive homosexuality. The Egyptians did not frown on homosexuality in general. It was certain kinds of homosexuality. For instance, being a willing participant in homosexuality. In other words, you're on the receiving end. That was frowned upon. or a man having sex with another passive man. But the Egyptians did not have a problem with sodomizing a man to show dominance. See, once you sodomized the man to show your dominance, he became your nekek. And being a nekek was frowned upon in ancient Egypt. That's what Seth was trying to do to Horus. He was trying to make Horus his nekek. And I'm going to show you that the gods did not have a problem with one man penetrating another man as a show of dominance. They just had a problem with the man who was dominated sexually, or the nekek. In other words, a nekek would be what we look at today in prison culture. You know, a man that's raped in prison, he will be considered a nekek. But in prison culture, the aggressor is never looked upon as weak or even homosexual. In prison culture, a lot of guys who rape men, they don't just do it for pleasure, they do it for dominance. And that's how Egyptians viewed homosexuality. If you were a nekek, or in other words, the receiver or the taker, you were looked down upon. You were considered weak. You were considered a coward, whether it was through dominance or you volunteered to do it. If you were on the receiving end, that's what they looked down upon. But homosexuality in general, as far as you being an aggressor and dominating another man sexually, that was okay. And I'm going to show you that they weren't even particularly dogmatic or legalistic about that.